Okay, here's my very short preview for the video that I'm going to do later today. I'm going to call it The Shape of Things to Come. Okay, it's 1st of March 2020. And what I'm going to discuss later is the S-curve for China and how the rest of the world is now following this similar path of a wild acceleration, a linear phase and then a plateauing off, and we in the rest of the world are just entering the wild acceleration phase, similar to what Wuhan and Hubei province were like at the end of January. So we're seeing things like this in South Korea. Almost no, sorry, that's world cases. We're seeing this with the world total cases, almost faster than an exponential rise. We're seeing the rest of the world cases, this is on a log chart, overtake the new cases in China. So the new cases in China here in purple dotted line, falling down to about 300 per day from 4,000 per day here, and that one day where you got about 12,000 new cases at some point, depending on how it was added in, but you got these clinically diagnosed cases and a big spike. But now at 300 cases, the rest of the world up to 1,000. You can see that the total global cases in blue were trending down quite nicely, but because of this contribution now from the rest of the world reaching 1,000 cases a day, the total global cases have started to trend up. So the rest of the world is on the beginning of the S-curve. It's on the beginning of that path. This was Wuhan, okay, Hubei province, late in January, doubling at once every 1 3/4 days, more than doubling every 2 days. The rest of the world at the moment, on average doubling every 6 days, but it's getting faster actually. It's doubling about every 4 days right now. So we're in this phase. We had first a few isolated cases. Let's take a little look at Singapore. That was what I was going to look at in my previous video. I'm going to have to get onto Excel and take a quick look at Singapore. Okay, Singapore may have this under control. There's a chance. Okay, here we have a bit more detail actually of the new daily cases in China falling to 300, the rest of the world's cases going up to 1,000 a day, and this reversal of the downtrend in the total global cases going from a downtrend to an uptrend in the last 4 days. Very, very bad sign indeed. Which really means a global pandemic, to be quite honest. I mean, there's no way that that's going to be avoided. Now, Singapore has actually done quite well, probably better than most. They've had about 96 cases so far, and you had these little exponential rises followed by a shutdown, and it was following a roughly parabolic path until they had this slightly bigger rise, and they seem maybe to have shut that down. That would be done by very aggressive contact tracing and quarantining. So they still, I don't know what the report for today will be, but they're still at 96 cases. They're still just under 100. And that is quite amazing, but it looks like there may be another uptrend coming here. So you're getting these S-curves. Every time you get an exponential rise and you get a leveling off, once new cases are isolated, let's say, and limited in their ability to transmit the disease. Maybe they're quarantined and basically locked down, and you then get a falling off. But of course we keep getting new outbreaks all the time. So Singapore has done quite well, but it's still in danger of being an uptrend. Japan has gone more into a sort of an exponential situation. as you can see. The ship was like that, very similar exponential rise. It might be argued to be a parabolic rise, because sometimes there are lockdowns and it actually decelerates for a little while and then you get another acceleration. So you don't always get an exact exponential trend, but you get somewhere like South Korea has obviously taken a very serious exponential path. And one of the things actually that shows that you have an exponential rise is if you also have an exponential rise in the new cases. Okay, so South Korea log chart, it's not quite a straight line, but if you take the later part of the graph, it does give you a very exponential kind of graph actually. It depends which points you take. Sometimes the exponential trend gets ahead of the cases, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a roughly parabolic trend. But it doesn't really matter, it's still a wild acceleration to the upside. It's a little bit difficult to predict more than a couple of days ahead. So let's have a look at one or two of the charts that I've got here. This was the rest of the world cases. That is faster than an exponential rise. The exponential curve is here. And obviously it's just taking off explosively. So yes, the train has left the station and we're on the beginning of a massive rise in rest of world cases. And it's going to take very strict quarantine measures like you had in Hubei province and Wuhan and China to stop this rest of the world situation from emulating this China situation that you had in January and early February. And in the end, probably, and it's quite likely, that you're going to see this kind of thing in the rest of the world in the future. You're going to see the China cases, okay, and then you're going to see a similar curve in country 2, maybe that's South Korea, similar in country 3, maybe that's Italy, similar in country 4, Iran, whatever, country 5, country 6, etc, etc, etc. And so you've got 88,000 cases I'm predicting for China altogether. Completely unforecastable, really, for the rest of the world. These could be much bigger than this, they could be smaller than this. One for Singapore looks like it was levelling off at about 100 cases, which would have been invisible if you compared it with China at 88,000. But of course, you know, there's always the possibility that you're going to get an outbreak in one country which is bigger than the one in China. So you could end up with a graph like that. So this is the shape of things to come. And China, yes, I think is predictable. 88,000 cases, 3,400 deaths. The rest of the world is completely open right now, but it's probably going to end up looking like this. And the more liberal the quarantine measures are, the worse it's going to be. The more strict the quarantine measures. Remember, Wuhan was shut down here in the China situation, and at less than 1,000 cases, and you still went to 40 or 50,000 before you started to get a deceleration in the increase in cases in China and a flattening out. And it's taken really a couple of months to get that under control, an enormous human and enormous economic expense. So if this isn't tackled very early, things are going to get really, really wild somewhere, probably in a lot of places. I'm very concerned about our current laxity in the UK. at the moment on our lack of border controls. We should be closing the Channel Tunnel. We should be closing our airports to anybody from Wuhan in China, anybody in Hubei province, maybe anybody in China, certainly from anybody in Iran, certainly from anybody in South Korea. We really should be closing the Channel Tunnel, because we should be closing off to flights from Italy too, and we should be quarantining anybody who comes from any of those countries for a month at least. And I think people on business, to be quite honest, businesses should do telecommuting, they should do video conferencing, they should avoid international travel completely. And honestly, I really think that a government should say to businesses, especially big businesses, if you're going to do international travel, you're going to bring people into the country, they have to be quarantined for a month. And you as a company have to pay for it. If you send people abroad and they come back from Italy, from South Korea, from China, from Iran, you pay for the quarantine. And the quarantine has to be at least a month, because there's already evidence that the incubation period for this disease can be, in some cases, up to 24 or even 27 days. So it's really an unknown. The 2-week quarantine period is barely long enough. Some cases are probably going to get through that. So no excuses, Mr. Boris Johnson, no excuses, Conservative government and your COBRA team and all of that lot who are meeting tomorrow. You really need to get off your butt and secure the borders of our country like you said you would in the Brexit debate. It's much more urgent than that. Okay, it's much more urgent than that with this disease. You can't afford to keep our borders open. You should be closing the Channel Tunnel, because you never know who comes through there. And you should have people on the ports inspecting anybody who comes into the country. And you should have the police there, you should have the army there, you should have customs there, you should have medical people there, and just bloody get on with it. And that's my message for today. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll come back with another video probably later today.